In today's game, something rather unusual occurred towards the end, and while it might not have a massive impact in the grand scheme of things, it's definitely worth talking about. For those who follow these matchups closely, this situation could spark some interesting debates. And before we dive into the details, if you enjoy content like this, please consider subscribing. Now, let's break down what happened. The incident in question involved Angel Reese and Diamond DeShields during a key moment in the game. To set the stage, let's talk about a specific play that caught a lot of people's attention. During a crucial part of the game, Caitlin Clark was making her move, cutting along the baseline, when she was body-checked by Diamond DeShields. This happened off the ball, and it was a pretty clear foul. You could see DeShields extend her arm to block Clark's path, which is textbook for a defensive foul, especially off-ball. Now, this might seem like a routine foul at first glance, just another play in a highly competitive game, but the context surrounding it makes it much more interesting. For starters, this wasn't just a regular game, tensions were high, and both teams were playing with a lot of intensity. Caitlin Clark, known for her aggressive play and sharp shooting, has been in the spotlight all season, not just for her skills, but also for how referees have been calling, or in some cases, not calling, fouls against her. And this game was no different. Clark was getting bumped, shoved, and hand-checked throughout the game, and many of these fouls went unnoticed by the referees. What's more intriguing is what happened after the foul on Clark. Angel Reese, a player who's never been shy about expressing her opinions, had something to say. Reese made a comment to DeShields, which was picked up by the courtside mics, suggesting that Clark gets a different whistle, implying that the referees are somehow favoring her with more lenient calls. Now, this kind of statement is pretty bold, especially considering how the game was being officiated. From what we've seen, Caitlin Clark hasn't exactly been getting favorable treatment from the refs. In fact, if you've been following her games closely, it's clear that she often faces tough, physical defense, and the refs tend to let a lot of it slide. Let's look at this claim in detail. Throughout this season, Caitlin Clark has been subjected to some very physical play, and the refs haven't always been consistent in calling fouls against her defenders. There have been multiple instances where Clark was clearly fouled, but the refs let it go, leading to frustration not just for her, but for her teammates and fans as well. For instance, in today's game, Clark was not only body-checked by DeShields, but she also got shoved multiple times while dribbling, had 2 of her passes kicked by defenders, and still didn't get the call she deserved. It's clear that Clark's whistle is far from favorable. But to fully understand the impact of Reese's comment, we have to consider the bigger picture. This wasn't just a spontaneous remark, it was part of a larger, ongoing conversation about how referees officiate games, especially when it involves star players like Caitlin Clark. Reese's comment that Clark gets a different whistle can be seen as a reflection of her own frustrations. As someone who also plays with a lot of physicality, Reese has likely experienced her fair share of questionable calls, or lack thereof, throughout the season. And she's not alone. Many players, especially those who play a more physical style, often feel like they're not getting the same calls as others, leading to a perception that the referees are biased. Now, whether or not this perception is accurate is up for debate. But what's undeniable is that this kind of talk can lead to some pretty intense discussions, both on the court and among fans. It's also important to note that Reese's comment was made in the heat of the moment, during a private exchange with a teammate, and it just happened to be picked up by the cameras. So, while it might not have been intended for public consumption, it's out there now, and it's stirring up conversation. Speaking of conversations, this isn't the first time Reese has made headlines for her comments. Just recently, she sparked a bit of controversy when she downplayed the significance of certain awards, saying that she's more focused on winning games than on personal accolades. This kind of mindset is typical of a competitive athlete, but when combined with her latest comment about referees, it paints a picture of someone who is intensely driven and possibly feeling the pressure of the season. But let's not forget the other side of the story. While Reese's frustrations are understandable, the reality is that both she and Clark have had to deal with inconsistent officiating. Neither of them seems to get the calls they deserve, and this has likely contributed to the physical nature of their games. In today's matchup, for example, there were several instances where the referees made questionable calls, or no calls at all, that affected both teams. It wasn't just Clark who was on the receiving end of tough defense. Reese, too, had to battle through some questionable no calls. This brings us to the broader issue of officiating in the league. There have been numerous games this season where the referees seem to be struggling to keep up with the fast pace and physicality of the players. Today's game was no exception. At one point, the refs took an incredibly long time, 5 minutes, to be exact, to review a simple play where the ball was clearly thrown to a player who was standing out of bounds. This kind of delay not only disrupts the flow of the game, but also raises questions about the competence of the officiating crew. And it's not an isolated incident. We've seen similar situations in other games, like the Connecticut Sun game, where a clear out-of-bounds call took an absurd amount of time to review. So, where does this leave us? Well, it's clear that both Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese are incredibly talented players who are dealing with a lot of challenges, not the least of which is inconsistent officiating. And while Reese's comment about Clark getting a different whistle might seem provocative, it's also a reflection of a deeper issue that many players face. The fact that these kinds of remarks are being picked up by the cameras and sparking debate among fans shows just how much the officiating in the league is under scrutiny. As we wrap up this discussion, I want to leave you with a few thoughts. First, it's important to remember that players like Caitlin Clark and Angel Reese are navigating a tough, competitive environment where every call, or missed call, can make a difference. Their frustrations are real, and they're valid. But at the same time, these players are also pushing the boundaries of the game, and their intensity and passion are part of what makes them so exciting to watch. If you've enjoyed this breakdown and want to see more content like this, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Also, feel free to drop your thoughts in the comments. Do you think Caitlin Clark gets a different whistle, or is this just part of the game? We'd love to hear what you think. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video.